Hello, world, and thanks for listening to Master English with Tim, the podcast where Tim teaches you English in depth and detail and without ever hurrying. In this week's B1, B2, and C1 vocabulary building lesson, we will talk about 10 useful phrasal verbs. If there is one thing that makes the difference between the way native speakers and non-native speakers use English, it is phrasal verbs. Native speakers use phrasal verbs all the time, and they do it very naturally. For everyone else, phrasal verbs are hard, but they can be easier. In this episode, I will show you how phrasal verbs are actually easier than you think. Before I start, though, I need to explain one word that I will use from time to time in this episode, especially towards the beginning. That word is transparent. If something is transparent, light can easily go through it, and as a result, we can see through it. So, for example, white wine is transparent. Red wine is at most partly transparent, but usually red wine is non-transparent. And rosés, or pink wines, are semi-transparent or partly transparent. Okay, now that we've talked about transparent, we are ready to come back to our phrasal verbs. Let's get started right away with a difficult phrasal verb, make up. Make up has 4 different meanings. You can make up a story, or make up an explanation, or make up a reason for something, or make up an excuse. If you make up any of those things, you invent or create them. In other words, you tell a lie. 4 examples. 1. She is very good at making up stories for why she is late. 2. Tom made up a lot of nonsense and put it on his resume to get a better job. 3. Stop making up excuses for why you didn't buy me a gift. I know you just forgot my birthday. 4th and last. Politicians are good at making up reasons for why they break their promises. Okay, the second meaning of make up is to stop arguing, forgive each other, and return to having a positive relationship. 3 examples. 1. Jane and David didn't talk to each other for 2 weeks, but they finally made up. 2. Can we please stop arguing and find a way to make up? I want our friendship to be the way it was before. 3rd and last. I think we can only make up if we first have a serious talk about what went wrong between us. Okay, in its third meaning, make up is usually in the passive voice. So we say, is made up of, or are made up of. So for example, water is made up of 1 atom of oxygen and 2 atoms of hydrogen. The European Union is made up of 27 countries. And phrasal verbs are made up of a verb and an adverb, or word like on, up, or through. The 4th and last meaning of make up has a slightly different construction. This time, the full phrasal verb is make up for something. You can make up for a mistake that you made, and you can make up for something that you missed or lost. If you make up for one of those things, it means that you do something that balances them. 3 examples. 1. I got COVID and missed 10 days of school. Now I have to make up for all the work that I didn't do. 2. We have to drive faster to make up for the time that we lost by leaving the house late. 3rd and last. Douglas's readiness to study day and night makes up for the fact that he's not the smartest guy in the biology class. Okay, that's all the meanings and examples of make up and make up for. While you were listening to those examples, you probably on some level were thinking that phrasal verbs are really hard, that there is no clear connection between the individual words that make up the phrasal verb. Or who knows, maybe you thought that same thing, but only about make up. Well, we have a special term for multi-word expressions, including phrasal verbs, whose meanings cannot be understood just by understanding the individual words that make them up. We say that phrasal verbs and other multi-word expressions that you cannot understand by understanding the individual words that make them up are non-transparent, so a bit like red wine. So the big problem that students have with phrasal verbs is that they think phrasal verbs are non-transparent. But we also have transparent phrasal verbs. A phrasal verb is transparent when its meaning can easily be understood if you know the individual words that make it up. An example of a transparent phrasal verb is put down. If you put something down, you move it to a place where it is lower and then you leave it there. So, are most phrasal verbs transparent or non-transparent? Well, the truth is that most phrasal verbs are somewhere in between. They are what we call semi-transparent. Semi-transparent phrasal verbs are ones where one word in the phrasal verb, usually the verb itself, has some connection with the phrasal verb's meaning, but that connection is not enough to clearly understand the complete phrasal verb's meaning. So these semi-transparent phrasal verbs are a bit like rosé wines. Right now, let's do one more non-transparent phrasal verb, and then after that, the other verbs in this episode will be either transparent or semi-transparent. The non-transparent verb I want to work on now is put up with. If you put up with someone or something that you don't like your neighbor's loud partying at night, or your friend never washing the dishes, or your roommate always forgetting to lock the door when he leaves, then you learn to live with these negative behaviors. Of course, you aren't happy about them, but you still live with them without going crazy. So another way to say put up with is tolerate. So 3 examples of putting up with things. 1. I've put up with your complaining for far too long. Can't you find anything positive to say? 2. Your new job starts in a month, so you only have to put up with your negative colleagues for another few weeks. 3rd and last. We live near an airport, so we have to put up with the sound of airplanes flying overhead every day. Okay, like I said, most phrasal verbs are at least partly transparent. So let's work on our first semi-transparent phrasal verb of the episode by first checking our understanding of its main verb. So if you point at something, for example the door, then you extend your arm and then your finger in its direction in order to bring someone's attention to it. And now for our phrasal verb with point. If you point out an important fact, then you tell someone about it, someone who does not know about it. 3 examples. 1. Thanks for pointing out that the zipper on my pants was down. 2. During elections, newspapers always talk about surveys of voters, but almost no one points out that the number of people who actually participate in those surveys is so small that it's hard to come to solid conclusions from them. 3rd and last. I think she doesn't understand how much others appreciate her help. Someone should point out to her how important and respected she is. Our next semi-transparent phrasal verb uses the word weed as its main element. That's weed, W-E-E-D. The word weed can be a noun or a verb. The noun weed means any undesirable plant that people don't want to have in their garden or lawn or farm. People don't want weeds because first, they are ugly, and second, because people think that they kill the plants that are useful to them. So, a weed might be a plant that competes with your flowers for space. Let's now talk about weed as a verb. If you weed your garden, it means that you remove the weeds from it. You pull the weeds out and throw them away. So, when you weed something out, that's our phrasal verb, our target phrasal verb. When you weed something out, you identify it and then throw something out that is of low quality. 3 examples. 1. Before you give the early version of your text to your teacher, read through it and weed out the worst grammar and spelling mistakes. 2. This difficult mathematics course quickly weeds out lazy and incapable students. Professors know that everyone who completes the course is a good student. 3rd and last. The library is weeding out books that no one has read in many years and selling them to private buyers. Okay, let's move on to another verb. This verb is draw, with past forms drew and drawn. The most common meaning of draw is to create an image or picture of something using a pen or pencil. But draw also has another very different meaning. It means to pull or attract something. In a few cases, you can draw something that is physical. For example, in old cowboy movies, you often have a situation where 2 cowboys who hate each other are standing in the center of an old, dusty town ready to kill each other, and each one tries to pull out his pistol or draw his pistol faster so he can shoot the other guy first. Also, you might say that your city's water system draws its water from a local reservoir. It pulls its water from a local reservoir. Another example, if you are a criminal and are running from the police, you don't want to draw attention to yourself by staying in places where there are lots of people. Finally, you probably also have heard draw in the sense of pull in the expression draw a conclusion. If you draw out an event or a process, usually, by the way, an unhappy event or process, then you cause it to take place over a longer period than is necessary. You can draw out an argument, draw out a meeting, draw out a divorce, draw out a war, draw out a trial, draw out a discussion, and so on. In fact, draw out is interesting because it is more often used as a phrasal adjective than as a phrasal verb. 3 examples. 1. The office meeting was so drawn out that at the end of it, not even the presenter cared what was happening. 2. Lawyers are always happy to draw out unhappy divorces as long as possible to earn as much money as they can. 3rd and last. In the 1950s and 1960s, movies lasting 2.5 or 3 hours were very common. Nowadays, those movies seem impossibly drawn out. So I'm sorry for all these sad, sorry examples, but I think I can make you feel better pretty quickly. In other words, I think I can cheer you up. Some things that can cheer a person up are cat videos, a solid 8 hours of sleep, a nice dinner, and of course, good news. As for me personally, I cheer up quickest when watching cat videos or stupid action movies. And honestly, I don't watch enough of either of them. I'm too busy. I'm already in a good mood though, so I don't need to cheer up. But I think when I'm done watching this episode, I will watch some cat videos anyways. And speaking of good news, I just saw something really amazing on TV a few minutes ago. It was about a new medical treatment for people who are paralyzed because of injuries to their spinal cords. Some of the people were able to move their fingers, and some of them were able to start to learn to walk again. And I think that the next time I feel bad, I will think about those people's lives improving, and I think it will cheer me up. Let's move on to our next phrasal verb, which is ramp up. So ramp up, R-A-M-P space U-P, ramp up. If a process or activity ramps up, it becomes faster or more intense. So work in an office usually ramps up after the new year. And then when summer comes, work in an office dies down a little bit. That's our next phrasal verb. If something dies down, it becomes slower, quieter, or less intense. Another place where work ramps up and then dies down again is, of course, a school. Maybe on the first day or two of school, the amount of work is not so big, but after that, it really ramps up right away and only dies down again at Christmas time. One more example. During COVID, sales of bicycles really ramped up a lot. People wanted to exercise outside, and they bought lots of bikes. And then after maybe a year or two of crazy sales of bicycles, of course, died down again. By the way, you might have been wondering what ramp means when it's alone. In its base meaning, ramp is actually a noun. A ramp is something that is used in sports to help skiers, bikers, and skateboarders to jump higher. A ramp is like a big triangle that you can ride or ski up. The lowest part of the triangle or ramp is on the ground, and then it goes up at maybe 15 degrees. At the high end, a ramp is maybe a half meter high. If you want to jump off a ramp, you need to ski or ride towards it as fast as you can go up the ramp, and then jump from the tall part of the ramp. So I think now with this information about what a ramp is, you can understand why we say ramp up to talk about increasing the speed or intensity of an activity. Okay, our next and last phrasal verb uses the word boil. Water boils when it is 100 degrees centigrade. You use boiling water to cook things like eggs or pasta or vegetables. Especially when you boil vegetables, though, you destroy a lot of the nutrients in them, so nutritionists don't suggest doing that. Now think about what happens if you boil very salty seawater. If you continue to boil your seawater for a long time, you will have a little bit less water every minute and a little bit more salt. And finally, the seawater will boil down to just dry salt. Or if you boiled sugary water, then your water would also disappear and leave you with just sugar. And again, you could say that your water boiled down to sugar. The most important use of the phrasal verb boil down to is to say that something is extremely important to reach a goal and that everything else is just details. That makes a little bit more sense than it seems to in the beginning. So just listen to the examples. For example, if you want to run a marathon, it really boils down to running every day. If you own an online store, it all boils down to making people know that your store exists and then making them want to buy things from you. If you want to win an election, it boils down to making people think that their lives will be better if you win that election. If you want to become a successful author, it boils down to writing books that people want to read. Okay, we've done all of our phrasal verbs, but before we finish for today, remember that most phrasal verbs are at least partly transparent, so learning them boils down to knowing what the base verbs mean and, of course, a lot of practice. Thanks for listening. Until next time.